Your firewall is hardened. Your patches are current. Your team passed every phishing simulation this year. And then your accounting software pushes a routine update and takes down 14,000 organizations in 48 hours. That is not a hypothetical. That is NotPetya 2017. And it did not attack your perimeter, it attacked your supply chain.
Supply chain compromise is one of the most catastrophic and underappreciated attack classes in security history. Every generation thinks they have addressed it, and every generation discovers they have not gone deep enough.
And the threat is accelerating. Software you deploy today has dependencies on libraries your developers never directly chose. Hardware arrives from suppliers whose own suppliers you have never audited. The attack surface is no longer a boundary, it is a web.
Wait, our security can fail because of code someone else wrote, running inside software someone else built, on hardware someone else manufactured. How do you even begin to secure that?
That is exactly the question Domain 1.12 answers. By the end of this video, you will know how to assess, monitor, and contractually constrain third-party risk, and understand why the exam tests this area more heavily every year. Here is who is with me today.
Hi, I'm Core. I love making complicated things click. That is my thing.
Lewis here. I like the ones that are deceptively interesting. This qualifies.
Emma here. I stayed up way too late researching this. Worth it.
Great team. Let us get into it.
Supply chain risk did not begin with software. In the 1980s, intelligence agencies were concerned about tampered hardware arriving from overseas. The fear was that components could be modified at the factory to enable surveillance or sabotage before they ever shipped.
Today, we formalize this into 3 distinct attack vectors. Hardware risks include counterfeit components, implanted surveillance chips, and tampered firmware installed before the device ever ships. These are difficult to detect because the device functions correctly. The compromise is invisible.
Software risks are the fastest growing category. A Trojanized update like NotPetya is one path. Open source library poisoning is exploding. Attackers contribute malicious code to widely used packages, and developers pull it in without realizing it.
Service provider risks come from managed service providers, cloud platform vendors, and any third party with persistent access to your environment. When a managed security provider is compromised, every client they serve becomes exposed simultaneously.
Even if I vet my direct vendors, their vendors could be compromised and I would never know. That seems almost impossible to control.
That is fourth-party risk, your vendor's vendors. It is real, and it is one reason regulators push for flow-down requirements. Your contract with a vendor must require them to impose equivalent security standards on their own subcontractors.
The industry is moving toward continuous vendor risk monitoring rather than annual point-in-time assessments. But the exam still emphasizes the foundational tools, and understanding those is what gets you the points.
A mature vendor risk program starts with tiering. Not every vendor gets the same scrutiny. A vendor with direct access to your production environment and customer data is critical tier. A vendor selling office chairs is not.
Security Operations Center reports were formalized by the EICPA as the standard mechanism for service organizations to demonstrate their controls. Security Operations Center 1 focuses on financial reporting controls. Security Operations Center 2 covers the trust service criteria: security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy.
I keep seeing Security Operations Center 2 Type I and Type Roman 2. What is the actual difference? Does the exam care which one I ask for?
The exam absolutely cares. Type I is a snapshot. An auditor reviews control design at a single point in time. Type Roman 2 covers at least 6 months of actual operation. Type Roman 2 is far more meaningful because it shows controls were actually functioning, not just documented. For high criticality vendors, Always request Type Roman 2.
For vendors who cannot produce Security Operations Center reports, questionnaires fill the gap. The Standardized Information Gathering Questionnaire and the Consensus Assessments Initiative Questionnaire from Cloud Security Alliance are the two most widely used. Stick around. Later in this video, we will show you how all these tools feed into a defense playbook.
For the most critical vendors, those with privileged access or handling regulated data, questionnaires alone are insufficient. Contractually require on-site audits, right-to-audit clauses, and access to penetration test results. Paper compliance is not security.
Once I have tiered my vendors and reviewed their Security Operations Center reports, what do I actually put in the contract? Is there a standard baseline?
Every vendor contract for any supplier handling sensitive data should include a minimum security baseline. The floor is consistent. Encryption in transit and at rest, access controls aligned to least privilege, and documented patch management timelines.
Incident notification requirements became a major priority after breaches like Target in 2013, where the compromise started with an HVAC vendor. Contracts should specify the maximum notification window. GDPR sets 72 hours for processors and penalties for late notification.
The right-to-audit clause is one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal and one of the most commonly omitted. It gives you, or a designated third party, the contractual right to assess the vendor's security posture at any time.
Service-level agreements need to go beyond uptime percentages. The service-level agreement should define recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, and what happens contractually when those metrics are missed. A vendor who promises 99.9% uptime with no penalty for missing it has made a marketing statement, not a commitment.
The flow-down requirement closes the fourth-party gap Emma raised earlier. Your contract must explicitly require the vendor to impose equivalent security requirements on any subcontractors they engage. If that language is absent, your supply chain controls stop at the first tier.
The exam tests this with scenarios about what is missing from a vendor agreement. Read the scenario, identify the absent control, notification, right to audit, or flow down, and that will be your answer.
If the last decade was about securing the perimeter, the next decade is about knowing what is running inside it. The SBOM is the foundation of that shift, and it is moving from best practice to regulatory requirement faster than most organizations realize.
A software bill of materials is a comprehensive inventory of every component inside a software product. That means open source libraries, third-party modules, proprietary code, and their transitive dependencies. The dependencies of your dependencies.
What does an SBOM actually contain? Is it just a list of library names?
The National Telecommunications and Information Administration published minimum elements in 2021. Each entry must include the component name, version, supplier, a unique identifier, relationships to other components, and an author field. Think of it as a nutrition label for software, ingredients, sources, and known issues.
The regulatory mandate came with U.S. Executive Order 14028 in 2021, requiring federal software vendors to provide SBOM. This created market pull that is now reshaping procurement across the private sector. If you sell software to the federal government, you produce an SBOM.
3 dominant formats exist: Cyclone DX from OWASP, SBDX from the Linux Foundation, and SWID tags from NIST. The exam does not require you to memorize format specifications, but you should know all 3 exist and that they serve the same fundamental purpose.
The operational value becomes clear when a new CVE drops. Without an SBOM, finding which applications use a vulnerable component takes days. With an SBOM, that query takes seconds. Log4Shell in 2021 was the textbook case. Organizations spent weeks just identifying their exposure. An SBOM turns that from a weeks-long fire drill into a minutes-long query.
So the SBOM is the tool that makes supply chain risk actually manageable at scale, instead of a permanent guessing game.
That is exactly right, Emma. The SBOM does not prevent vulnerabilities, it makes them findable.
June 27, 2017. Maersk, one of the world's largest shipping companies, watched their screens go dark one after another. A message appeared demanding Bitcoin, but this was not ransomware. There was no decryption key. There never was. NotPetya was a wiper, malware designed to destroy, disguised as ransomware to cause confusion.
Its entry point was not a phishing email or a brute-forced virtual private network. It was a routine software update from MEDOC, an accounting platform used by nearly every business operating in Ukraine.
The attackers had compromised the MEDOC update infrastructure months earlier. When the update was distributed, it carried the malware to every organization that trusted that vendor's automatic updates. Trust weaponized at scale.
Maersk lost between $250 and $300 million. Their logistics operations were paralyzed for 10 days. They reinstalled 45,000 personal computers and approximately 1,000 servers, all in a 10-day around-the-clock rebuild.
Merck Pharmaceutical lost $870 million and halted production. FedEx lost $400 million. Total global damage estimates exceed $10 billion from one compromised software update channel.
$870 million for a pharmaceutical company. From an accounting software update they had nothing to do with riding. How is that attributable to their security program?
That is the exam-critical lesson. Supply chain risk is your risk. The vulnerability originated at a vendor, but that does not reduce your liability, your operational exposure, or your board-level accountability. Domain 1.12 exists because the security community had to learn this the hard way.
Picking up from the Security Operations Center report discussion, the real evolution is treating vendor security as a continuous signal, not an annual checkbox. Security ratings, platforms, threat intelligence feeds on vendor domains, and monitoring update channels for unexpected changes are all part of modern continuous monitoring.
Monitoring without structure fails at scale. Every mature vendor risk program uses tiering. Critical tier vendors get the full treatment: on-site audits, penetration test access, quarterly reviews, and contractual right to terminate on security grounds. Low-tier vendors might only require an annual questionnaire.
The principle is proportionality, which connects directly back to how we think about risk in Domain 1 generally. The control investment should match the potential impact. A vendor processing 2 million customer records warrants different scrutiny than a vendor providing marketing email templates.
What about when we stop using a vendor? I feel like offboarding gets forgotten.
Offboarding is the most overlooked phase in vendor risk management, and one of the most dangerous. Access must be revoked, data must be returned or cryptographically destroyed, and the vendor must provide written confirmation of deletion. This happens before the contract formally terminates, not after.
For exam prep, NIST, Special Publication 861 Revision 1 is the primary supply chain risk management framework reference. It defines cyber supply chain risk management, CSCRM, and provides control overlays for federal agencies. You should know it exists and what problem it solves.
Drop in the comments. Does your organization currently require SBOM from software vendors? I want to know how far along the industry actually is in practice, not just in policy documents.
Before the quiz, let me flag the traps the exam consistently uses in this area. Trap 1. The exam will offer Security Operations Center 2 Type I as a satisfying answer for critical vendor oversight. It is not. Type I is point-in-time design attestation. For critical vendors, you need Type Roman II operational evidence over at least 6 months. Know that distinction cold.
Trap 2. Candidates confuse the SBOM with a vulnerability scanner. The SBOM is a transparency tool. It tells you what components are present. A separate vulnerability management process determines which have known CVEs. The SBOM makes that vulnerability process possible. It does not replace it. Know that boundary on exam day.
Trap 3 tricked me when I was studying. The service level agreement governs availability and recovery metrics, not security requirements. If the exam asks what ensures a vendor meets security requirements, the answer is the vendor agreement and minimum security baseline, not the service level agreement.
Trap 4, Lewis will appreciate this one. The right to audit does not exist unless it is written into the contract. An assumption that you can audit a vendor because you are the customer is not a security control. If it is not in the contract, it is not enforceable.
Drop in the comments. Has your organization been affected by a supply chain incident, or has a vendor audit uncovered something you did not expect? The community learns from real experience. If you forget everything else from today, remember this. You can outsource execution to a vendor. You cannot outsource accountability. When a supply chain breach happens, whether it is NotPetya, SolarWinds, or the next attack we have not heard about yet, the organization whose data was exposed is accountable. Full stop.
History teaches those who listen. And the history of supply chain attacks teaches that every organization that said their vendors were secure was wrong, until they verified it.
All right, quiz time. Let's find out what stuck. Think through each question carefully before you answer.
A like and subscribe takes less time than reading this sentence. Do it now and help us reach more learners.
An organization's software vendor was compromised through their build pipeline, and a Trojanized update was distributed to all customers. Which supply chain risk category does this represent? The correct answer is B, software supply chain risk.
A security manager is reviewing vendor contracts for a critical cloud storage provider. Which control is most important to include to enable verification of the vendor's ongoing security posture? The correct answer is B, right to audit clause.
What is the primary difference between a Security Operations Center 2 Type I and Security Operations Center 2 Type Roman II report? The correct answer is B. Type I is a point-in-time design assessment. Type Roman II covers at least 6 months of operation.
That is the quiz on supply chain risk management. Let us bring it together before we close out.
Supply chain risk has been a known threat class for decades, but the scale keeps escalating. NotPetya showed us that a single trusted software update channel could paralyze the world's largest shipping company and cost the global economy over $10 billion.
The industry response has been concrete. SBOM are now mandatory for federal software vendors. Security Operations Center 2 Type Roman II has become the baseline expectation for critical cloud providers. And continuous monitoring is replacing annual questionnaires at forward-looking organizations.
And the exam lesson I want to lock in. You can outsource your software, your infrastructure, your processing, but you cannot outsource accountability for what happens to the data you are responsible for.
Next up is Domain 1.13, Security Awareness and Training Programs. We cover how organizations build security culture, measure behavior change, and why the human layer is still the most attacked surface in the entire stack. If this video helped clarify supply chain risk for your exam prep, hit subscribe. We publish new CISSP domain videos every week. I am signing off. See you in 1.13.